Time for another episode of One Stalker. Today, it's Oliver Platt and Gareth Wheeler joining yours truly, Adam Jenkins. With Concacaf Champions Cup, Canadian Premier League schedules, Toronto FC, and some futures for MLS Cup and the UEFA Champions League on the program, we dive into what we like to call the A block. That's the top of the show, the big story. And the big story is the fact that Forge are out of the Concacaf Champions Cup. They played their second leg yesterday to Stadio BBVA in Guadalupe, and, well, it was a bit of a humbling experience, wasn't it? Losing 3-0 on the day, 5-0 in the tie. They do collect that third and final gemstone of Mexican World Cup host venues, but this is probably one, Oliver Platt, that did not go their way the most. No goals, blanked, and quite honestly, in a tie, where they really should have had a little bit more to show from it, they get nothing. So other than the experience, other than the memories, and the fact that they get to play competitive football against one of the elite teams in our region twice before the league season, what are you taking out of this? Where are the positives for Forge supporters today?
Well, I thought they played some good football at times and created chances. Like, I will say, I think this is a disappointment for Forge. You know, they came into this one saying we've got a couple of years under our belt. Now it's time to start winning these ties. That was obviously always going to be a massive long shot against this type of opposition. But to come out, you know, without scoring a goal, 5-0 in aggregate, I do think it's a little bit of a letdown given what, you know, this club has come to expect even in continental competition. And I think it kind of opens up an interesting debate between, you know, Bobby Smoniotis has been very strong on the fact that he wants to continue to play the football that they always try to play, whether they're playing 8th place in the CPL or one of the top teams in CONCACAF. And does there need to be an adjustment there? You know, I'm kind of the mind that they could have played however they wanted against Monterrey, and they probably still would have lost this tie, just given the quality of the opposition opposite them. You do see in the way they play, the way they choose to approach these games, like I said, some really nice passages of football, some legitimate goal-scoring opportunities that, you know, if they were taken, and they probably should have been taken, maybe the scoreline at least looks a lot different than it does. But also some frailties, like set pieces, moments where they get caught a little bit too high up the pitch, overcommitted, that you just wonder if there could be a bit of an adjustment there. So disappointing overall, but, you know, I did think at times that Forge did what I think they want to do in these tournaments, which is show their class and their brand of football.
Monterrey are a legitimate contender to win this tournament. Okay, let's not forget about that. They're an excellent team. The thing that stands out to me the most, Adam, is Forge look rusty. Just the touches on the ball, the execution, the things that this team is really tight and really focused on executing week in, week out. They just were unable to do it. I don't think it was a step up in competition, because what I did like is they did create chances. They should have had at least a goal in this tie. You can make the argument they probably could have had 3 or 4 in this tie. And just the execution wasn't good enough for me. I also really like the fact that this team has some really good players in it. Like, although they were rusty and I don't think they performed to the best of their ability, this team is loaded. I think that the fullbacks, Juremovic, there you go.
Juremovic, you got it. You'll get there. It's a tough one.
Could actually be upgrades. And I liked Para and Malcolm Duncan last season. But I think that these two could even make this team a better side. And yeah, they created those chances. I mean, Brian Wright just couldn't finish his breakfast or lunch over these 2 games. And I think Mo Babuli was a little bit rusty. 5 new players in the starting 11. Maybe that was a little bit too much to expect. It's really annoying to talk about the fact that it's like the first game or 2 of the season. You're taking on a team that's in season. Like, it's so annoying that we always have to mention it, but it's not an excuse. It's a reason. And I think that played into maybe some of the disappointment in this tie as well.
Yeah, it's certainly a storyline, and I think Wheels is right. 5 new in the starting 11, a few debuts as well. The weekend, Maxime Fillon, the U Sports draft pick, comes in, does a decent job, gets an experience of a lifetime. You think maybe he's a player for the future for this club. But what I found interesting, and look, it's never nice to dunk on guys when they're down, but you can look at some of the players that weren't great in the first leg, but were able to be better or more like themselves in the second. I think Dan Nimick was probably average in leg one. He stood out to me as a strong performer last night. Tristan Borges looked a whole lot more like himself. How are things different if his strike goes under the crossbar instead of off of it? Rezard Rama steady in both but one, and Gareth's already kind of alluded to it, so let's maybe push the envelope a little bit further here. If you're a Forge supporter watching that match and you see Brian Wright, whether he thought he was offside and mentally checked out or what, but he gets a clear cut all on his lonesome breakaway and he can't put it in the back of the net after missing his opportunity in leg one, are you mildly concerned that perhaps this isn't the upgrade that the club needs, or are you giving him the benefit of, as Gareth once again mentions, it's the first 2 games of the season?
I wouldn't say I'm concerned. Like, I think it is too early to, rush to judgment on any player in the first 2 games of the season against opponents like this. But I think I just kind of look at that signing a little bit differently. Like, I know he is the Players' Player of the Year, and I thought he was fantastic at times last season, and deservedly in contention for individual awards. But I wouldn't necessarily say that, like, I still think Brian Wright has something to prove, put it that way. Like, I think this is a step up for him, and he has to demonstrate that he can be the guy week in, week out for Forge as their number 9. Like, this is a player who, again, is coming off a fantastic season, probably the best of his career. But he has, over the course of the 4 seasons he's been in the CPL, he's scored 24 goals in 102 games. That's good. That's not great. Like, he is still, I think, going to need to raise his game to another level if he's really going to be the guy that, leads the line for Forge on a consistent basis. And this was maybe a little bit of an early taste of that the expectations go up, the type of games you're playing in certain competitions, the level goes up, and he's now got to rise to that occasion. So it's too early to write him off or anything like that, but maybe it was a little bit of a wake-up call in that regard of what's going to be required of him this year.
I mean, if you're a fan of Forge, your confidence in the players taking a little bit of a hit. It has to. Like, first impressions are sometimes lasting impressions. And over the first 2 legs, I honestly can't believe that he didn't score. I'm not trying to be harsh. It's the first couple games of the season, but the glaring misses were one thing. I just don't think his hold-up play was anywhere near good enough. They need both of that. They didn't have a number 9. Really, that was effective after they sold Kwesi Poku last summer. This was the most important signing that they made over the course of the offseason, not just for Canadian Premier League success, but Canadian Championship success, where they have aspirations to go on and win it as well. Brian Wright isn't a kid anymore, guys. Like, he's 29. He's going to be 30 when the new season, the Canadian Premier League, kicks off. Is he that guy who was dominant over the first 4 months of last season that was the Players' Player of the Year? Or was he the player that Benjamin Mora decided to bench going into the playoffs and for big playoff games for York United last year, and the player who only scored twice the season before? Those questions are going to be asked. If he can be that player, and I think he can be, by the way, the player who started last season, then Forge have got a gem and potentially the missing link in terms of their aspirations. If he's the other guy, perhaps that Wright signing may turn out to be the wrong one.
Well, that's exactly right, isn't it? Because they clearly decided, Forge, that the striker group that they had wasn't going to cut it, and they all left. Jordan Hamilton, not re-signed. Terran Campbell, not re-signed. Brian Wright comes in, and then he's surrounded by some young players who are going to be hot on his heels, for minutes. But there's no doubt with these big tournaments, Brian Wright needs to be a major positive for Forge if they want to have any success in 2025. But it's curtains for them in their first tournament of the year. Not the case yet. And Cavalry supporters will be hoping not the case for about another month for the Cavs, because on Thursday they head to Mexico City. In fact, they're already there preparing to play Pumas, and they will be starting the match with a 2-1 advantage. Of course, it can be found right here on One Soccer, a 6 p.m. Mountain Time kickoff with a full 30 minutes pre, post, and halftime. Charlie O'Connor Clark and Christian Jack on location for one of the biggest matches in club history. So let's go there next. We looked at some of the odds on TonyBet, and to win the match, you're thinking, okay, well, that's maybe free money, some of the extent of the line, but to actually advance, I think it's only around plus 250, Gareth Wheeler. So the odds makers even think that the Cavs are really in with a shot here. Are you tempted on that value to say, you know what? I could sprinkle a few bucks on that because you believe that they can do it.
Needs to be more. I think that number's a little bit short, to be honest with you, because Canadian clubs, when they go to Mexico, they typically lose. And oftentimes
Once in 22,
lose
I think.
by a considerable margin. Well, 23 Canadian clubs have made the trip down to Mexico. Only one team has won, and that was Toronto FC. And then they wouldn't have advanced in that tie because they ended up going to penalties and losing in a penalty shootout to lose the Concacaf Champions League final at that time. But I mean, this is about the here and now. Let's talk about Pumas before. I don't think that they're anywhere near as good of a team as we saw Forge play Monterrey. Monterrey's superior. I think despite their positions currently in the Liga MX table, I just look at, in terms of Pumas and the players that they have in terms of selection, in terms of their attack, they don't have that one really top goal scorer. I don't think they have a top goal scorer inside the first 20 in Liga MX. So it's strength in numbers. They're a well-organized defensive team, but I don't think they're a team that's going to run Cavalry, into circles and run them completely off the field. It's about Cavalry just not, being their own worst enemy. No self-inflicted wounds. They need to play within themselves in this game, take their chances in the few times that are presented to them, and try to keep this game manageable as long as possible. It's unfortunate that the ridiculous away goals rule still applies in CONCACAF. That's something that needs to get changed, because you'd feel a lot better if it wasn't in place, because Pumas did go out and get the away goal. If it was like the way that European and lots of footballing organizations around the world go, I think that Cavalry would have a much better opportunity. And finally, when it comes to Cavalry, they have a guy who's on incredible form right now and seems like he can score against anyone, anytime. And that's Tobias Warshevsky. If he has a few chances, and they will be limited in this game, if he can end up getting that away goal the other way for Cavalry, then perhaps the complexion of this tie completely changes. Pumas are and should be the overwhelming favorite, but I do think we're in a position where we can dream a little bit here and say, what if? I don't think Cavalry will be completely outclassed. The game is within themselves, and they need to be the best version of themselves to give them a shot in this one.
Well, that's just it, Ollie, isn't it? The sort of three prongs of success for Cavalry in leg one. Warshevsky wonder goal. Game plan from the coaching staff was perfect. But then every single player, or at least 95% of the team, was at like a B+ or higher. They brought it. Their performances matched the balance that Tommy Whelan Jr. was able to concoct with his group. They got to do that again, obviously. But in this one, it's you maybe hope for the goal and play the best defensive game of your life.
Yeah, I still think they're significant underdogs, even with a lead going into this second leg. And if they can get whatever result they need to progress, even if that could obviously be a loss, I think it's a more impressive night for them than last week in Victoria. It's going to be that difficult in Mexico City. There's a couple of reasons to feel optimistic. Will's touched on some of this. Like, if Cavalry score, it gets complicated for Pumas. Like, this is not a team that is full of goals. In their 4 home games this season in Liga MX, they've scored 2, 0, 1, and 1. So obviously with a Cavalry goal, 2-1 takes us to extra time. Pumas needs 3 to get through without having to go to those extra minutes. So, that's one reason I think to feel like they're in with a shot here. The second one is that this is a club that is toxic right now. There is a lot of pressure on Gustavo Lema, the manager. He's almost openly feuding with supporters, both during matches and after matches in press conferences right now. He said something about, the Pumas fans even booed Hugo Sanchez, their biggest legend. So he's not surprised that they're going to boo him. Hugo Sanchez then on TV says that never happened. So this guy is like as unpopular as it can pretty much get without him losing his job. So if Cavalry can get through the early stages of the game, if they can get a goal in this game, that crowd could turn, and it could be a very unpleasant place for the home side. So they've got a chance here. It is just when you look at the history of Canadian teams, MLS teams, whatever you want, playing in Mexico, it's a massive ask.
And not to mention, you can talk about dreaming, Gareth, in this tie, and sure, CPL supporters, Canadian supporters, Cavalry supporters will dream. How about what would lie ahead for them should they get through? Because at that point, you're looking at Alajuelense, who are absolutely not a minnow in this region, but they're also not one of the favorites to get through. So suddenly you're saying, well, why not the quarterfinals where they might play someone like a Monterrey, Saprissa, or Vancouver
let's do
Whitecaps?
Thursday night first.
Hey, this is all about
Yes.
the dreaming. We're dreamers on this program.
I said that. I said that on the broadcast last night. Like, this is the fun part about it. Cavalry have earned that position where people can say, "What if?" So, if they didn't come away with a result in the first leg, then we'd be having a very different conversation right now. They earned that right, and so I'm really excited to see what they can do. I mean, defensively for me, I mean, the Kobza Valling combination on the right side of defense, they held their own in the first leg. You know, going away from home in a completely different environment, how will that look? How will they be tested? How will they fare? Significant questions surround that. So if they can do the job defensively in this post-Dan Klomp world, then all the power to them. I think they can go in and do some damage. But, you know, all he's right, step by step. But it's fair to dream. They do have a chance. As what it is, they do have a chance. You're saying there's a chance. 1 in a million, I'm taking it.
And you're looking at the fact that they might have some more healthy bodies. Maybe Fraser Ed might be able to go. If suddenly you get a Diego Gutierrez fully fit, do you say Trafford goes to center back? Does Field come in? There are things that they can do instead of just necessarily rolling out the same 11, or they run these guys into the ground knowing they're going to have to give everything and then trust the bench. Quickly, Ollie, a question that our producer desperately wants us to get into the show, and I think it's a simple yes or no. If Cavalry do this tomorrow night, is it the biggest shock in Canadian soccer history?
Yes.
Agreed?
Yeah.
Wheels?
I'd say yes, but close in the conversation is Cavalry defeating the Vancouver Whitecaps in the Canadian Championship year 1 of the CPL. No one knew what this project would look like, especially out of the gate. And I'll just never forget that. The fact that Cavalry beat the Whitecaps in their first year in the Canadian Championship competition. That's right up there as well.
Yeah, they'll hope to continue to create some shockwaves around CONCACAF. A reminder, 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time. The pregame show begins with a 6 p.m. kickoff. And of course, it's live on One Soccer, just as is the Canadian Premier League. And today was the day, after much to do, waiting for the schedule to be released. It was released, and we can confirm some dates for you, or you can just go to canpl.ca/schedule and see them for yourself. Some notes right off the top, some takeaways from it. The schedule looks a lot the same as last year. One big difference is that for the first time in league history, all clubs will play at home in the opening month of the season. Those are your opening weekend fixtures. It is Atletico Ottawa hosting Halifax, Forge and Cavalry, Pacific and Valor to round out the opening day triple header, and then on Sunday in Langley, Vancouver hosting York United. Valor was also announced to be getting a school day game this year after the successful one at Forge in 2024. The Hammers will be doing it again. And speaking of doing it again, we will see the outcome return.
Yes.
Four matches, all 8 teams on the final day of the season to determine the playoff seedings and matchups all the way towards the CPL final that will be played either November 8th or November 9th. So the big change is we're starting earlier this season for our 112 games in 2025's regular season. Okay, Oliver Platt. All that to be said, obviously some hype for you that the outcome is back. You must have had a great time with Nigel Reid in Winnipeg, some long-lasting memories. What are your feelings after the schedule release, and what are you looking most forward to?
Well, that was what I wanted to point out and say what I was most looking forward to. I thought the outcome was a tremendous addition to the CPL calendar, the Canadian soccer calendar last year. So I'm really happy that's back. It was just great to see, simultaneous matches, real stakes, obviously, on the day. Hopefully we get a similar kind of or an even better set of scenarios this year. But I thought that was really fun. So I'm glad to see that's back for 2025.
A couple notes. the two school day games are great in Hamilton, in Winnipeg. That's an enjoyable, and it's been a nice addition. Happy to see the tradition continues. Labor Day, Halifax Wanderers, York United. Yes. It just feels right based upon the history of that tie. It seems like the schedule is going to leave a little bit more breathing room. I think it wraps up with the outcome on October 18th. Adam, you would know better, but it seems like things are wrapping up a little bit later, so things will be drawn out in terms of the playoffs well into the month of November. But that's okay. The weather's kind of been shifting, and it's been agreeable over the last few years as well. So I'm cool with all of that. I'm very selfish when I look at a schedule. I'm like, what does this mean for me? And no one wants to hear me praise or tear down anything. It's great. It's exciting. And now it's time for fans across this country to start plotting their summer schedules.
Well, that's exactly right, isn't it? The October 19th actually was the outcome last year, so it is almost identical to change, like you rightfully say, Wheels.
I thought it was
just
earlier.
That we're starting about 10 days or 2 weeks earlier, so there is going to be some more room for, let's hope there's no crazy weather. There will be. This is Canada. I feel like the windows behind me are vibrating right now with the snowstorm we're about to get. That's neither here nor there, but yes, we can officially count down to the start of the CPL and know the full extent of the fixtures this season. Cannot wait for those on One Soccer. Cannot wait as well to see how Major League Soccer's big year goes as well, and certainly for our three Canadian MLS clubs, the new coach out west, Jesper Sorensen, CF Montreal, and the really exciting project they're building, and what has been occasionally a circus at Toronto FC. And the general manager, Jason Hernandez, well, he didn't do much in the way of quelling, any of those loud voices shouting for change and asking questions. When he said about 5 days ago, we mentioned earlier this week about the season seat holders event that Toronto FC held earlier, outlining some of the things and priorities this year that they wanted to tackle, but something that we didn't have time to get to on Monday, Gareth, and I want to make sure I'm getting the quote right here. When asked about Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy, and of course the very quick backstory, he was traded to CF Montreal. Jason Hernandez said that to send the national team prospect for $1.3 million in allocation money was an institutional failure. I'm not going to cast all the aspersions, mostly because I'm the host of this program, Ollie, but if you want to cast any, don't you hear that quote and say, aren't you the institution, Mr. Hernandez?
Well, he hasn't been for, the timeline that Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy came through at TFC, and I think he's right. Like when you look at kind of the situation as it's been at TFC, both that the player had to deal with in general, and then the specific treatment of the player himself, like it was a failure from start to finish. It started with people within the club who weren't necessarily even in technical roles and probably shouldn't have been giving this kind of take or opinion that this kid was basically the next Alphonso Davies and that it's going to cost you $20 million if you want to sign him off us, and he's the best player in his age group in North America, and so on and so forth. There was so much hype before he even got to the first team. And then when he gets to the first team, here's the pathway he's had. 2020, he makes his debut under Greg Vanney. That's already disrupted because it's a COVID year, and Greg Vanney leaves at the end of the season. 2021, he has Chris Armas for a few months. He gets fired and then has an interim coach in Javier Perez. 2022, Bob Bradley. 2023, Bob Bradley gets fired. Terry Dunfield's the interim coach. John Herdman takes a couple of games. And then in 2024, Herdman is his coach and he gets traded. In addition to that, you have 2022, halfway through that, Richie Larea gets brought back, plays the same position, clearly is going to play ahead of him. And then last year, Federico Bernardeschi, their DP, they decide is now a wing back as well, competing with Marshall-Ruddy. So, whether the player was overhyped in the beginning, I think there was some of that, but he was never really given fantastic conditions for any young player to come through and establish himself in the first team at the MLS level. And I think it is a real blot on TFC that you go into this season with the two most talked about academy prospects in recent years, in Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy and Jayden Nelson, playing for Montreal and Vancouver. Like that's not a good look for this team that has poured a lot of money, a lot of time into the academy and has continued to struggle to make it work.
Gareth, you hear that and you think about the fact that there's some honesty there, and within that answer, there's also talk from Mr. Hernandez about the managers involved maybe having more say than he would have liked, or how the player was used had a lot to do with what the managers desired. So you can applaud the fact that this is an honest quote, but it just feels like it's another symptom of a really frustrating time at TFC with a lot more questions than answers. And I know you've been adamant on this program that they need to tear it down and basically start again.
They're in the process of resetting, rebuilding, whatever word you want to use. And it's because of that institutional failure. Like, this is a headline because the general manager is saying it, not because that isn't the case. Anyone that's been tracking understands what's going on. I wrote down the same list of managers since Greg Vanney left after the 2020 season as Oliver Platt did. What do all of these gentlemen have in common? The answer, nothing. In terms of playing style, approach, demeanor. You can't keep on changing your manager that requires different types of players to play that way and expect success. Meanwhile, you're trying to bring through players through your academy who you've treated very well over the years. Ali Curtis, this seems like ages ago, said that Toronto FC had among, if not the best academy setup in terms of players in all of Major League Soccer. Well, what's come of them? These players are being put in positions where the only thing that's being constant is change. That's an institutional failure. And that doesn't mean there isn't good people working at the club and good players and good intentions, but there's no overriding directive of how this team will operate. And because of that, because they've lost their way, they've lost their image, they've had this institutional breakdown, they failed in three specific areas. One, in recruitment, because you need different players to play in different setups, and none of these players have come in and been able to hit their stride. In terms of asset management and cap space, it's been a nightmare. Trading away assets that could help you, or signing players to contracts that are way above their pay grade because you're in a panic. You have this urgency to succeed, which has gone all wrong. And then, like I was mentioning, academy integration. Like, these young players, far too much is being asked of them too soon, or they've been put in a position where it's been impossible to succeed. All of that has meant that there's been an exodus of players like Jaquil Marshall-Rutty, where they should have been a success story, or at least you should have been able to receive much more in terms of assets coming the other way in terms of these transactions. So yeah, institutional failure. My big question is Jason Hernandez the right guy to take this team out of it? It's not because I don't like Jason Hernandez. He's a great guy. He's a smart guy. I think he's a bright future managing in the game, but this is a huge undertaking that's being put on the shoulders of someone that doesn't have experience doing that. Who else? Where is the team around Hernandez? Where is someone that can help lead him through some difficult decisions, difficult times, including this negotiation, this potential buyout with Lorenzo Insigne, which is a dark cloud that continues to hover over this club. Big decisions need to be made. Who is going to make them? How do you right these institutional wrongs that continue to set back this club? These questions need to be answered.
Excellent rant, Wheels, and I almost feel bad that I'm going to hand the microphone right back to you, because before we get to our final segment of the show, you found something for us that gave you quite the laugh involving Manchester
Give him another
City
rant.
and a tifo. Here we go.
This will be quick. I like, as a Manchester United supporter, my one solace, the one thing I can take enjoyment in this year, are the many, many failures of Manchester City, including their fans putting up this tifo, stop crying your heart out. Obviously alluding to the great band Oasis and their fandom of Man City, Vinicius Jr. not showing up to the Ballon d'Or because neither did the Real Madrid contingent, because they thought that he should have won and not Manchester City's Rodri. You do this before a game where you need to play home and away against Real Madrid, and your team is mired in incredibly poor form. And Vinicius Jr., the man of the match in a 3-2 victory at the Etihad. It's poetic. I love tifos. I love what fans bring to the table, but they got this one entirely wrong. Instead of stop crying your heart out, they should play another hit song. Please don't stop conceding. Because they can't stop conceding goals. Please don't,
Brianna Wheeler will play us out to the Tony Bet top 10.
Please don't stop conceding.
Our top pick is presented by Tony Bet, getting them in quick before YouTube strikes us down for copyright infringement. How about
That was bad.
At plus 295, the aforementioned Real Madrid plus 449, Jordan Wilson's Gunners at plus 592, or Barca, perhaps future home of Jonathan David Oliver Platt at plus 593.
Don't you just feel like Real Madrid are kind of rounding into it again at the right time? Like it was all Barcelona for the first half of the season, and now I look at that team and Mbappe's getting going, Vinicius, Bellingham. They got to get the defense sorted, but I'm going to go with Real Madrid.
I'm making a play with Atletico Madrid. That's where the value is. Real Madrid doesn't have center backs. Like, they're depleted defensively. I think it's a good shout. You got some value back in Atleti. The 1-1 draw last weekend was huge.
Gareth Wheeler, MLS outright, LAFC plus 299, the Galaxy plus 399, Sounders at plus 699, or the Houston Dynamo at plus 798.
No bet. 30 teams, 11 months from now, I have no idea what's going to happen. Honestly.
Yeah, these futures before the season has even begun, they're always fun to speculate.
In MLS, it's impossible. Impossible.
That's it for us today. See you tomorrow for Concacaf Champions Cup on One Soccer.